What's up, Ninja Babes? Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Kara Mack, and I'm here with Roby. And I'm super excited for her to be joining us today. We're going to get into some really cool stuff, some data. I know many of you love to talk about how much sleep are you getting, different levels of things in your bodies, all this stuff. If you have a Whoop or if you have one of those other watches and trackers, it's like we're obsessed, right? Okay. So today we're going to get into athlete blood tests and what that means. But I'm really excited that Anna is here with us because she personally is on a mission. She is here to help women better understand and nourish their bodies to achieve their best. Anna is a registered dietitian, an exercise physiologist. She's also part of the athlete blood test group. She's actually the chief research officer of athlete blood test. And we're going to get more into what that all means. But her job basically is to help work with athletes and evaluate what their needs are, how they can better increase their performance and make changes to enhance their work and enhance their performance. So Anna, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I'm pumped, and you're about to make some ninjas really excited by talking to us about how we can become better ninjas.
Awesome.
So,
That's why I'm here. I want to help you guys out.
yes. So, why don't you just start off? Tell us a little bit more about athlete blood test and just explain what it is, because I think some people might not even realize that there are these specific biomarkers and things in our blood and in our bodies that can be an indicator of where we're at in our performance levels. And there's actually things that we can change and enhance. And that's new information for some of us. So explain what athlete blood test is and what is this all about?
Yeah, so Athlete Blood Test is a unique company in the sense that it is a blood testing and a biomarker testing company specifically for athletes. So we've all gone to the doctor and had our blood drawn, but when you go to the doctor, they're looking more for deficiency and disease. But Athlete Blood Test is a very organic company that was started by a group of athletes. They were professionals who were training at a very high level, and they were curious how their training was impacting their body. So the founder of Athlete Blood Test, we just call it ABT for short. It's kind of a mouthful. Dr. Rock founded ABT after he started collecting data with these pro triathletes. And from there, it expanded into other sports and different types of athletes. And so we have over a decade worth of data collection before they finally sort of refined these ideal ranges for athletic performance relative to the general population. Because if you go to the doctor, they're going to look at your blood and they're comparing it to the general population who's sedentary. So, for example, Kara, you might go and they might tell you your iron is just fine. And that is true relative to sedentary people. But being just fine for day to day living is very different than optimal for training or for competing. And so that's really what we started looking at with these biomarkers is we noticed that there are certain things in our blood that are going to indicate relative to your performance how well you're absorbing that training, are you getting the right nutrients, and how is your body functioning sort of from the inside to really translate into your best performance. So it's a small kind of boutique company that focuses on helping athletes achieve their best with their performance and day-to-day life too. We want to make sure that athletes are enjoying their sport and that they're not feeling rugged and ragged when they're training, and they're really trying to get their best performance and enjoyment out of it.
Yes, I love that. And there's something that you mentioned that I don't think I caught the first time we talked and the first time we chatted about this, because you mentioned that those athletes who were first involved in the idea and starting it, um, they wanted to see how their training was affecting their bodies. And I think so often I think about it the other way around, like how is my body doing in training? But I think later on we'll get into a couple more stories, but I know I've seen personally how training has affected my body, or like I guess it's a domino effect. It's like vice versa. But I didn't think about how, yeah, there might be ways that, the way that I'm living, my nutrition, all of this, is it really optimizing how I'm going to be receptive to training? Like I didn't think about it that way. So even just like my muscle growth, or how is the training, like is it latching on? Is what I'm doing actually making a difference, like optimally?
Right, right. And so it started out with professionals and the Olympians, the professional athletes, they've had access to blood testing for a long time, but it's relatively new to have anything less than a professional or high elite athlete have access to blood work. And that's really what we want to help bring to athletes who are also, moms and have a day job and, a life outside of training, because anytime you're exercising or moving your body consistently, meaning working out several times a week, that's going to influence your body. How is your heart pumping? What is, your vitamin D status? How's your stress level? All of those are going to be changing in response to your training as well as your nutrition. And so that's really where we come in and try to help put the pieces together for athletes to make sure that their nutrition and their training is supporting, what their body needs from a functional standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. And when you think about American Ninja Warrior, so many of us, like you mentioned, we have our day jobs and yet we're like these ninjas doing all this crazy stuff. And I think, there are ninjas who are professional stunt people and like like their craft is also part of their job in that sense. But there's also people who we sit at a desk all day or we do some sort of other job and then we're so active at night or in the evenings, and then we get to the show, we make it to American Ninja Warrior, and here we are on the stage on TV. And I think people just always assume like, oh yeah, we're all professionals. We all get paid tons of money to do this, and it's not true. I mean, for a few of us, perhaps yes, but for some of us, no. And so I think it's interesting that so many ninjas were on this mindset of like, I am a competitive athlete, and we do compete in our own league and have these other avenues to compete, but our lifestyle in a sense isn't necessarily what like a regular professional athlete might look like, because we are working day jobs and then putting so much extra time into training beyond that. So I'm really interested to see how ABT can be a benefit to us.
Right. And the thing is, your sport is going to translate into other areas of your life too. So, for those of us who have a day job and we're also training, if we're so exhausted from training and we want to just crawl under our desk and take a nap, like that's going to affect our job performance or the energy to play with our kids or whatever other endeavors we have going on in life. And so, when you're feeling good and your workouts are going well, that's definitely going to sort of affect the other areas of your life. So it's really fun to see athletes, you know, dial in their nutrition, kind of change their training to support what their body needs. And things seem to just fall into place and sort of click once they figure out what it is that their body needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the ninja athlete, I mean, we could talk about athletes in general, but specifically for our community, we do a lot of competitions throughout the year, and then there's this big focus in the springtime getting ready for American Ninja Warrior. So when do you think it would be a good time to test? Like soon before a competition or like weeks in advance? Like, what do you think?
That's a great question. So, generally, you want to start with a baseline test, and this is before you start your training. Because what this is going to tell us is what your sort of quote unquote normal levels or your baseline is going to be. So, everyone is unique, and there's obviously an ideal range, but maybe you tend to run high in some things and a little low in others, and that's just your body's happy place. And so, we want to capture that with a baseline to see where are you when you don't have the effects of stress from training. So you get that baseline, and then about 2 to 3 months after you start your big training block is a good point to check in, see how your body's responding to the training. Maybe you're someone who does really well with high intensity work, or maybe you're someone who does better with more volume but lower intensity. So we can take a look at and see how your body's responding to that training, and suggest changes you could make to get the most out of the training that you are doing, so you're training smarter and not just harder. But then the really fun time to
Hmm.
test is about 6 weeks before your competition. So this would be the American Ninja Warrior competition. This is going to give us time to take a look and see where you're at. So if you have changes that need to be made, that gives us about 6 weeks to make those changes so that you are physiologically primed to do your best. And so, if, for example, if your vitamin B12 is a little low, this gives us time to get you up into that ideal range so that you are geared to go and ready to crush it, instead of checking right before and be like, well, some things are off, but you don't have time to fix them. So it's really nice to have that time to get everything into that ideal range. And also, it can help you figure out how much you need to taper as well. If your body's really taxed from the intense training, maybe a little bit longer taper is going to be beneficial for you. So it gives you a lot of different insights on how you can best prepare for your big competition, as well as making sure that you're physically primed and ready to go. Because mentally, psychologically, it's very helpful to show up to that start line knowing that, I'm, in my best shape that I can be to do well. And so that helps so much for athletes. There's so much of a mental component to ninja. So if you have that in your mind that I'm physically in a really good place to compete, that's going to give you a big advantage.
For sure, and I can imagine it's also the opposite. If you don't really wanna just take the test, like, the week before for kicks and giggles, and then you're like, "Oh, no, there's a bunch of stuff that I wish I could change and I can't," and then you're just thinking about, "Oh, do I have deficits? Like, what's gonna happen?" So, I'd imagine you don't want that either. But
Exactly.
I
And
have some.
I was just going to say, we try to work with athletes as best as we can around their schedule and give suggestions on when would be beneficial to test relative to their competition. So we'll do our best to try
Mhm.
to help them schedule their blood test when it's going to be most helpful.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting, though. I have so many questions. Okay. So, um, some of the first questions are like, what are the biomarkers and like the nutrition points and things that you're looking at? Is it all like vitamin, mineral based, or is it other things too?
So it's not just vitamin and mineral based. That's definitely a component of it. So we look at electrolytes, we're going to look at vitamins, minerals, but then there are also biomarkers that are going to indicate certain health and potentially performance indices. So these things that we look at are red blood cells. Red blood cells are really important in all sports, but especially for ninja because that's going to help with that oxygen delivery. So you can deliver that oxygen to the muscles that are working and trying to get through these challenges and the obstacles. Things like hematocrit and hemoglobin are really important for that red blood cell. So we look at the size, the shape, the density, how many red blood cells are there in your blood, especially for these longer events too. But then we're also going to look at white blood cells, which can give us some insight into your immune system function. How is the health of your immune system? Training tolerance is a big component, and this is going to be certain hormones such as like cortisol, testosterone, things like that are going to give us some sense of how your body is handling the training, and the hormones sort of reflect that, as well as organ function. We're not a medical company, we're not looking for diseases, but we want to make sure that especially with metabolic processes, there's a metabolic section in the report that kind of gives us an insight into, making sure that your metabolism is running smoothly and there are no underlying issues with that. So it's a really comprehensive look at the athletes, and there are different tests too. And so, for example, the test that we recommend, like 6 weeks before your big event, that's a little bit smaller. It's kind of more like a check-in instead of the big comprehensive one that you might want to get for your baseline.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then I would imagine that certain things might take longer to change and alter and like influence than others.
Yeah, definitely. So, if you have things that are pretty out of line, we'll give you recommendations and kind of guide you on how you can improve that or get that into that ideal range. But typically, we would recommend about, 2 to 3 months, depending on what's out of range. But check back in because let's say, for example, your iron was really low and we recommended changes or perhaps a supplement, then we wouldn't want to check back in to make sure that it's in that ideal range and not too high. So we always give a timeline, especially like for supplements. We suggest food first as kind of our philosophy, but for some athletes supplements are necessary, and so we'll be very clear about dosage and how long the supplement should be taken for, so that you're not just taking something forever, because we want to get you into that range and not just super high.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then also, like with hormones, I don't know if this is true, but in what I've learned, I feel like hormones you have like level ranges, but they're also fluctuating, and also for women, like they change throughout the month. So when you look at hormones, are you like how do you know that that's really where it's at if it's in a constant fluctuation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. Hormones definitely fluctuate, not just throughout the day, but especially for women, day to day and month to month, we're going to see changes. So for women, we have an option called the ABT She panel, which is female specific. And we're really excited about this because we're trying to kind of create this movement and empower women to better understand their bodies because female physiology and hormones can be very confusing. But once you understand a few basic concepts, it's really helpful in terms of changing your nutrition and training around your cycle. So, for women who are naturally cycling and they're not on any sort of like hormonal contraception, we ask that they test on day 3 of their cycle. So, that would be the third day of their period. Just because this is going to help standardize looking at those hormone levels. So that way it's easier for you to see too how things are changing month to month. It just is a way for us to kind of standardize things a little bit. But if it's not possible to test on day 3 because logistics can make a difference here, then we just ask that they let us know what day roughly that they tested so we can analyze it accordingly. Because if your progesterone seems really high, I might think that, oh my goodness, like something's out of whack here. But really, for where you are in your cycle, that's perfectly normal. So we also have a questionnaire that goes with the blood test that helps us get a little bit more insight into, what is your training volume, certain aspects that are going to be helpful. Are you on birth control? How is your sleep? How is your training going? Is your heart rate higher than normal? So some easy questions that can help us better analyze the blood test.
I love it. I'm just like my brain's going like thinking about everything in my own life as you're talking about this stuff. So another question about hormones is um, most people, I would assume, you could correct me if I'm wrong, when they're working out, their cortisol levels are rising. Is that like a given no matter what sort of exercise you're doing, or is that like if you're doing something very low key, maybe not so much?
Yeah, so your cortisol is going to rise the more stress is put on the body. So if you're doing a really intense workout, then it's going to increase a lot more than if you're say doing yoga or going for a walk. But anytime you're starting to increase your heart rate, it's going to raise a little bit, but again, it's proportional to the intensity. So if you do a really hard workout, we're going to see a big spike, but if you're going for a leisurely walk with your dog, it shouldn't go up too much, if at all.
Yeah, interesting. So I would just to throw in like a personal story. I don't think I've talked about this on the podcast in a really long time, but basically, I've been involved with Ninja Warrior for going on 4 years, and during my first year being involved with Ninja, I actually previous to that had been really struggling with my hormone balance, and I was seeing a homeopathic doctor who was helping me to correct it through nutrition, and basically, she had helped me realize that like the symptoms that was having was due to a hormone imbalance. And so I had some symptoms going on like extreme adult acne at like age 26, I guess this was. Um, just like tons of acne. I was trying to clear it up with like medication and it wasn't working. And then just feeling extremely like depressed or just a lot of anxiety throughout the day and then it would go away. And I just felt like I couldn't control how I was feeling. And so she helped me realize that it seemed like I was constantly in this like fight or flight mode and that I wasn't having enough natural progesterone to help like calm me down, basically, is how she explained it to me. So fast forward the story a little bit, once I started Ninja Warrior training, I had been already working with her for about I would say about 2 or 3 months, and I had seen great changes in my skin's appearance, how I felt. I felt like happy for the first time, like consistently. I just felt so different. And when I started training, I all of a sudden like a lot of these symptoms started to come back, but I was also experiencing where I would be working on an obstacle and it would be very taxing and like difficult, but I would just, get off the obstacle, feel like this wave of exhaustion and then like just burst into tears. And it wasn't like I was like, "Oh, I suck at obstacles. Oh no, I'm so sad." It was just like I felt like my whole body was just like responding in like this feeling of being overwhelmed, and I would just start crying. And I like couldn't figure it out, and I was like, "No, what's happening?" But again, I talked to this person about it who was like, "Yeah, I think it's just your stress response." But it just blew my mind that I could be having such a response like that to doing something physical on the ninja course.
Yeah, your hormones have a large impact on how you feel, your outlook on life in general. And so you mentioned that progesterone was low, and that makes sense because progesterone is that hormone that kind of helps you feel calm and chill. And so if that is too low, you're not going to feel calm and chill. You're going to be pretty anxious. Usually sleep tends to degrade if you don't have enough progesterone, which is one reason why sleep tends to decrease in quality as you get towards your period. So that last week, right before your period, usually women report having poor sleep, and that's one of the reasons is progesterone is decreasing. It's starting to fall in that phase of the cycle, and so our sleep tends to get really crappy. And so you want to make sure that you're supporting your natural hormonal fluctuations. And training definitely plays into that, because if you're overtaxed physically, then your body has a hard time producing hormones in the right amounts and having things be balanced, which, as you mentioned, can really throw things off.
Yeah, so it just makes me wonder, like looking back, if I had had the opportunity to take a blood test like this, would there have been some indicator that even in my training, like maybe there was a better way I could have been supporting myself specifically for training?
Yeah, and that's something that we see a lot with our female athletes, all athletes, but especially females, is, they feel like something is quote unquote off, and or they're not responding to training as well or like they used to. And so we'll do some blood work and they'll be like, "Oh, yes, that's why you're feeling this way." So I always want athletes to feel like they're empowered with their body and what they know about their body, and this is one tool that they can use, because your feelings are valid, they're justified, and it's not, likely just not in your head. And so you deserve to be heard and, respected with how you're feeling. And so this is something that you can use to sort of see what is going on, because this isn't something that you would intuitively know. It's not like we wake up and say, I feel a little low in folate today. So we don't know what we don't know. And this is something that allows us to kind of take a look inside the body and see what's going on, and then how can I make improvements so I'm feeling well day to day, and then that translates into better performance.
Hmm. Can you talk to me about injury prevention? So, are there indicators that we could have through the test that might show if something seems to be on like a downward turn, and maybe something we should be watching out for that could have possibly prevented injury if we had caught it on a test like this?
Yeah, so there are several biomarkers that we can take a look at. They can give us some insights into injury prevention or your likelihood of getting injured, especially things like your calcium levels are important. We want to make sure that your energy is sufficient. So, one of the common injuries are stress fractures. And so, this is something that you can avoid, making sure that you're getting enough phosphorus, vitamin D, vitamin K, and calcium, adequate protein. These are all going to be important for that bone integrity. Once you get to a certain age, and the age depends on which studies you're looking at, but the latest I've ever seen in research is age 30. Let's say it's 30. After that point, you cannot, increase your bone density. It's just maintaining what you've already built. And so we want to make sure that we're maintaining our bone density to avoid stress fractures, breaks, anything like that. Another one, especially, is ligament and tendon integrity. This is critical for ninja because as you're swinging and hanging, you want to make sure that you have those, quality, solid ligaments and tendons that are going to hold things nice and tightly in place, and that aren't kind of loose where things are going to get dislocated or twisted or torn, things like that. So, the main thing you want to make sure is you're getting enough energy to support this tissue integrity. And so if you start to see decreases in some thyroid, other things like cortisol will increase. You see changes in something called sex hormone binding globulin, as well as testosterone. If you're naturally cycling, we can take a look at your female specific hormones to see if those are out of range. Because if your body is starting to adapt because of your training, it's starting to shut down some of these reproductive functions. So you have changes in your hormones. That's an indication that other systems are going to be out of whack too. And so you're not going to have enough um, nutrition or energy to be supporting the integrity of those critical components like the ligaments, the tendons, the bones, and repairing tissue that if you already have an injury. So there's definitely some components that we can look at to make sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent getting injured in the first place, or if you are injured, making sure that you're supporting that tissue repair and recovery because it's very time sensitive. So you want to make sure that you're doing what you can because the body's pretty strict in terms of its healing timeline. You can't go back 6 months later and be like, okay, now I'm going to focus on healing this. If scar tissue's already been laid down, it's kind of like the ship has sailed. So you want to make sure that you're prioritizing the healing of whatever tissue it is that's been injured.
Hmm. So good. So interesting. I know too many ninjas that are hurt right now. So I'm just like thinking about them. But I mean, we have a high intensity sport, and so it's like I love being able to bring people on the podcast to talk about this stuff because it's so important. And I think when I started off, there wasn't enough warnings or just like teaching about injury prevention and watching out for things like this. So,
Right. And we want to be crushing it into our 80s and or however long we choose to. If we back out of a sport, we want that to be by choice, not by necessity because we're injured. So we
right.
want to make sure that we're looking at the long game here and to keep you healthy and well for decades to come so that if you choose to, you can be competing, you can be working out and training just as hard as when you were younger.
Hmm. Yeah. What about for some of our ladies out there who are trying to get pregnant or maybe are pregnant or just had a baby and they're looking to get back into training or they're or even training through pregnancy? Do you think how is ABT helpful in that sense?
So it's I would say especially helpful for women sort of in this quasi pregnant status, either pre, during, or post, in the sense that their bodies are going to be very sensitive to nutrients, especially energy balance. And so we want to make sure that they're getting the nutrients that they need, not just to support their training, but obviously their bodily functions and then their baby in whatever stage that baby or fetus or potential fetus would be. And so making sure that you have the nutrients for that because pregnancy demands a lot of nutrients as well as breastfeeding. I think breastfeeding burns like 5 to 700 calories per day. So it's a big energy demand on the body. So you want to make sure that you're getting everything you need to support not just your training, but then also your baby as well. The other thing too is you want to make sure that you're getting into your training in a healthy way. And what I mean by that is not doing too much, either volume or intensity, too quickly. So, our bodies are very adaptable. As you know, we can handle a lot, but the body handles stress much better if it gradually increases over time instead of seeing a big jump at once. So let's say that you've had a baby, you're getting back into training, you would want to sort of slowly gradually increase your training instead of saying, okay, I'm going to be training 10 hours a week and just jump right back into it because that's going to be a big stress on the body and that can throw things kind of out of whack. But let's say we start with 2 hours a week and we gradually build our way up. 10 hours isn't going to be a problem, but it's that big jump in training volume or intensity that's really going to stress the body out. So that's maybe one of the most helpful components is to see how is the body responding to your training volume. Is it too much? Everyone is different. And so you want to make sure that, you're not stressing the body too much, but you're challenging it in order to get those training adaptations and to get stronger and faster and better at ninja. So that's one of the biggest things that we can take a look at and see.
Yeah, I love it. This is I'm gonna throw you a random question here, but uh, I love learning about all this stuff, and clearly I love like your passion and what you do and how you're helping women. But what do you think is like your biggest motivator in your work and in why you're passionate about this, not just this test, but in helping women in general?
Yeah, I'm really passionate about it because I've been an athlete my whole life. I have a fairly diverse background in sports, but I've always been active. And I thought it was so cool when I learned that you mean what we eat affects our body? Really? Like, that's so interesting. And there's a science behind that. So I've always been curious. And I thought this is so interesting that what we eat can affect our body and how it functions and how we feel. And that seemed really powerful to me. And I'm particularly passionate about working with women because, aside from the personal bias of being a woman, women are really underrepresented in exercise science. So, about 70% of the research in exercise science is done in men. And the other studies that do include women often fail to account for important factors such as the menstrual cycle or hormonal contraception. So, this explains why most of the recommendations for women aren't as helpful, whether that's nutrition or exercise training related, is because the research is done on men. And so there's the the approach to shrink it and pink it, which is they'll study men and then they'll slightly reduce it and they'll call it the female recommendations. And now we know that it doesn't translate like
Oh,
that.
wow.
Yeah, so so it's really important to me that we include women in exercise science because we are now doing more exercise and training and sports than ever before. And I think that that is so incredible. And I really want to support other women and empower them because they are strong, they are powerful, and they have so much to bring to sports in general. But the issue is, number one, we don't understand our bodies very well. We have the like three lectures in like sex ed and like middle school. But beyond that, we're not really taught about our hormones. And then what we are taught is it's something to almost be ashamed of. It's just kind of like swept aside. But I really want to help women understand that your cycle is your superpower. Like, this is an advantage and you can leverage your physiology and use it. And it can be a little overwhelming at first, but I really try to work with clients who I work with one on one to we're going to switch around some things in your nutrition to work with your body instead of against it. And so that way they can feel like their body is supported and getting what it needs. And suddenly things seem a lot easier from a performance standpoint, from an energy, from, weight and body maintenance and things on overall health. So I think that women, it's kind of our time. We've been sort of swept under the rug and kept at arm's length when it comes to this area and research. And so with athlete blood tests and our ABT She initiative, we're really trying to empower women to use their bodies in a way that empowers them and feels good, and to be proud of that too. I think being a woman in sport is something to be proud of. And so we want to really support that.
I love it. Oof. Makes me so excited just like hearing you explain all that. Um, but I think it's so true that I think I okay, so I'm 31. I think especially women, my age and older, I don't think we did learn very well in school about what was so great about being female, like what was so awesome about it. And I think you were taught like, oh, get a little freaked out once a month when you're gonna bleed. Like I think that was something that I learned. But I don't think we were taught like why is it so special? Why is it something that, like you said, can be such an advantage and a benefit? And we've had an episode previous on the podcast by Nardine Faragala, and she spoke all about hormones and our cycles and even understanding when is that window of like performance advantage for women near ovulation. And so that was so cool to hear too, that like what, like that's a thing. I had no idea. So I
Yeah.
love learning about it.
Yeah, exactly. And you're spot on. That time around ovulation, that's when your testosterone peaks, and so that's the perfect time to PR. And so if you have the luxury of choosing when you compete, trying to time your competitions can be advantageous. But I want to make sure that women understand that world records have been broken in every phase of the cycle. So if you don't have the luxury of choosing when you can compete, because most of us don't, it's okay. You can still absolutely nail it, and you don't have to worry about your physiology working against you, because as long as you've got some of these components in place, you've got everything going for you.
Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah, actually, it's funny that you say that. I'm glad that you said that because I had Rachel Goldstein. I don't think she'll care if if I share this, but she had said to me after Nardine's episode, like, "Oh no, the next week I was on my period, and I was like double checking if I should I even go work out right now? Like, should I even go try this thing that I was planning to do today?" And I think sometimes, like, yeah, there's times to take that wisdom and take a rest or whatever it is, but if you can't physically plan your competitions, I wouldn't want to set someone up to be psyched out and think like, "Well, I'm just not gonna do well today," like, prematurely.
Right, right. That is one of the worst things you can do to an athlete is, make them think that they're at some sort of disadvantage going into their competition. So, and again, that's one of the things that athlete blood tests can really help with is if you go into it knowing that you're like, I've got all systems go, that's a really big, performance boost right there. So it's nice to know that you don't have to worry about your cycle being a detriment, but you definitely can leverage it to feel and perform at your best.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what is there anything else that you'd like to share before we close up, like, this segment of the episode?
I just want to, first
Otherwise
of all, thank you for having me on, but also just encourage women to,
yeah.
keep going at it. Like it's so fun to see what women are doing in sports now, and to understand that, your
Mhm.
cycle isn't something that's going to hold you back and something that you should be ashamed of, but rather it's something that we can leverage and use to your advantage from a physical standpoint, but also from like a mental standpoint too, just knowing how to support that with the right nutrients at the right times. So we're all cheering for everyone here.
Yeah. Woo! Yeah, I love it. So true. So there's two things that we're gonna get onto next, but I just wanted to say that for anyone who's listening and you're a Patreon member, you will hear the next segment of this episode where we're actually gonna dive in and take a look at an ABT report and help us see what do you get out of the blood test, what does it look like, kind of understand how you work through the results and see the sort of feedback you get and all that. So we're gonna do a little mini case study here. So I'm excited to jump into that. So thank you to our Patreon subscribers who help to make the Ninja Babes podcast possible and keep us going strong. So stay on the line if you're a subscriber. If you're not a subscriber, this is where the episode is going to end for you. So before we close up, I just want to say thank you again for Anna for being on. And where can people find more information about booking one-on-ones and working with you personally, or where can we purchase the test? Because I know that you have a very generously helped our Ninja Babes community out with this by offering a discount code NinjaBabes50, which we'll put that in the description. But where can people find the test and where do you actually go to take the test?
Great questions. So, yes, Ninja Babes 50 will get you $50 off the ABT She panel, which is our women specific one. And that includes all the female specific hormones, as well as the gold and the platinum panels. And those are the ones that are really helpful for the baseline. And so, you get $50 off for that. So you can go to athletebloodtest.com and you can type in your zip code and it will tell you the nearest labs. It's really slick. All you have to do is you purchase the panel online at athletebloodtest.com, and then you can go into any LabCorp lab and just go and get your blood drawn. You don't have to make an appointment or pay at the lab or anything like that. So it's really slick, really quick to get your blood done. And then we will send you the email with sort of the questionnaire, and then you'll get login information to a portal so you can see your test there. So athletebloodtest.com, where they can get that. Otherwise, if they want to get in touch with me, my personal website is dranaroby.com. That's DRANNAROBY.com. I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Anna Roby, and they can also follow athletebloodtest.com on Instagram as well. So I'm happy to answer questions. I love chatting with people. So feel free to reach out if you have questions or comments or are interested in kind of optimizing that nutrition.
Absolutely. And we'll write as all that information out in the description as well so people can find it easier. So thank you again. It's been so awesome. So now moving on for part two, if you're a Patreon subscriber, let's get into this report.
Be strong, be you, be a ninja babe.